I grew up in the art world, and then I had a severe accident when I was 11 years old and lost my eyesight over it. Also, actually, I wrote a book about this, which is coming out. It's titled Blinder Gallerist, which means blind gallerist. Kind of a joke on, or like a wordplay with a blind passenger. You're quite good in something, but you always think that you're not good at it.
Welcome to the Artelligence Podcast. Live Art's look behind the scenes at how the global art market really works. I'm your host, Marian Maneker. This podcast is brought to you by Live Art, the global art marketplace that puts you in control. Download the Live Art app to get all of the most relevant art market information, as well as access to exclusive private sales. Or visit us at liveart.io. Johann König is one of Europe's most entrepreneurial art dealers. He started his gallery in Berlin at 20 years old. Now, 20 years later, he has grown into spaces in Berlin, London, Monaco, Seoul, Vienna, Tokyo, and the Decentraland metaverse. More than that, König Galerie publishes a magazine, produces a podcast, and has launched a digital platform for NFTs and fractional art ownership called MISA. We'll have another podcast on MISA in the future. In this episode, we asked Johann what it means to be a gallerist in an age when the art market is changing how dealers build audiences and represent artists, and the nature of art itself is changing rapidly too. My first question is, it seems like being an art dealer in the 21st century means also being an art entrepreneur. I'm not sure that's actually any different from the way it used to be. You always had to have an eye to either creating publications or running your own events. And it's very much a sort of startup kind of business, going not just back to Byler, but, the guys in the 19th century. But I'm curious to hear from you, your perspective on sort of these, the new opportunities and how one, as a art dealer representing artists, positions oneself in sort of this more complex world.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's our 20th gallery anniversary. Even though I'm only 40 years old, I started quite some time ago. And at this time, this was pre-Instagram, pre-Facebook even, I think. So it was a different world then, and far away from Bitcoin or crypto or blockchains. And I think back then, which sounds funny, a gallery was really the market access. So if you were an artist and you had no representation, you hardly had any window or possibility other than your direct peer group, which is funny because we have this Rotary Club here in Germany, I think worldwide. And I remember, I grew up in a family household. My father is a curator, my mother is an illustrator. Gerhard Richter was their best man. I think that my father was very good or bad, So there were great artists and bad artists. And there were these categories of Rotary artists, which were artists who, were probably more entrepreneurs and which I think doesn't say anything about the quality of their art, just that they took the initiative in their own hand, and because they had no one else to distribute their work, they just did it. And this is a reality we see, I think, in the NFT world now too. That there's this giant amount of creators, artists, however you want to call them. They just find their way to market their creative outcome, which I think is great. My gallery name was Johann König Berlin. When I started in 2002, very much influenced by Konrad Fischer. His gallery name was Konrad Fischer zeigt originally, which means Konrad Fischer shows or displays. So I wanted to avoid the name gallery. It's also interesting, when I went to school, then my father was a curator. No one had the silentest idea what a curator is. today curator is someone who does a selection for a retail store too, So
everybody's a curator now. Everything is curated. Yes.
Yeah, and this term didn't exist. It was exhibition maker. This is how we called it. I did not want to be a gatekeeper. So the motivation for me to open a gallery was really much to develop careers, manage artists, help them produce and facilitate their dreams and ideas, and eventually make work possible, which wouldn't be possible without our commitment and support. But not to tell what's good or bad, or and so I think it's 20 years forward. I think it's super interesting that this independence on both sides, galleries as well as artist side, are of course a big challenge, but also a great chance, because again, if you did not have a gallery, you did not have market access, and if you did not have a good gallery, considered good, or you did not have a market presence on Art Basel or on in one of the very important fairs, and with also what you guys do at Live Art, it's changing it, So yeah. And also this, I remember my main focus was to get in Art Basel,
Yes.
And yes. That was like the triumph, and that was like the year after year. I
it's
measured
like a Michelin star.
own. Yeah, and but what's crazy is that you measure your self-esteem, your and this is, I think, we all can learn so much from artists, because artists, they focus on their work, they have to find a language, they have to develop it, and then they have to make it better and better, and then and they take so much risk in doing this, because they usually go very far before anybody acknowledges anything of what they're doing. Often even they have to overcome critique and things like this. So then I found myself in judging my own quality based on if the committee would let me join the fair or not. And I think that these standards, because of how the world has changed, are changing. And I think that's a good thing, but also a challenging thing, because if you as a gallery have to provide more than the simple market access, you have to step up your proposition.
What I hear you saying, and what I think I also see broader in what's happened over the last 20 years is you are starting lots of different businesses, whether it's your magazine or what you do on social media or your own podcast or MISA or any of these other aspects, or opening new galleries in different cities. You're doing all of that to develop more of an audience, to create greater connections to collectors, and it's turning it around, where we view galleries primarily as being representatives of the artists. Over time, increasingly, they've become aggregators of an audience, and the access you're providing is not to the market for the artist so much as for the collectors to the artists themselves. So, that you can gain access to these artists for people who have a relationship with you, have worked with you, have bought from you.
Yeah, I think it's more driving from in my background, because I grew up in the art world, and then I had a severe accident when I was 11 years old. I played with firecrackers and lost my eyesight over it. Also, actually, I wrote a book about this, which is coming out very relatively soon in English. It's titled Blinder Gallerist, which means blind gallerist, which is a kind of a joke on, or like a wordplay with blind passenger. So because it was also a little this complex, how would you call it? That you think that you are able, that you're quite good in something, but you always think that you're not good at it. So-and-so syndrome. I forgot the name now.
We call it imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Exactly. So, and coming from this world, sort of elitist world, but at the same time, my father had no proper art historic education, but fled the military service, worked with Warhol, and so on. And me growing up in this, then my brother went to New York very young to open his gallery. So really as insider as you can be, for me, art was really a strong support source, going through this difficult time. And then as a teenager, I discovered like my own perspective on art through this teacher in the blind school. So I really thought that art is such an outsider in our cultural landscape compared to other cultural fields such as music, theater, acting. And I think that really my goal is to make art more accessible on all allies. And then I noticed that on all sides of the aisle. And then I noticed that it was very difficult to create any attention for the pure context of an art exhibition or the body of work of an artist. So then I started to sort of market it or communicate it combined with other things, and that worked out quite well. So and for example, the podcast I'm doing, speaking with artists about their practice, now it's been more, which is great, a new development. But I think for a lot of people, artists are still from another planet or different category. And I think it's very important that non-art world people notice it's also a market, it's also an industry. It's also human beings, and I think the more transparent we are about the mechanics, the more easy it is to grow this, to grow the art market in general, to give more people, artists, the capability to make a living of their art, and just grow it globally, which I think is automatically happen, but it's also important to then take the moment to help shape the future of the art world.
Well, it's interesting that artists have become, either through collaborations or just inspiration in terms of having larger audiences, less direct their effect and more, almost being like paragons. People see their work and are inspired by it and do things that are either too close, knockoffs, or a next inspiration from it. Now, I think more than ever, and there's become a role in the creative economies for art as opposed to, it's like original science research as opposed to engineering and all that. So it's people doing sort of pure creative concepts that other people turn into, more sort of culturally broadly available. And we see this with, music and movies and all. There's much more of a connection between artists and those fields today than there were in the past, going to sort of your comment about artists sort of dealing with the public in a different way.
Absolutely. When the purpose of the gallery used to be more of a providing a certain access to a community or a client base, now that's still very much important. But I think more important now is to provide space. So I really think that our main role is to provide space with the galleries we are running. We have this focus on running gallery spaces in very unusual locations. So we have our sort of flagship gallery here is in Berlin, in a former Catholic church, brutalist concrete building. In London, it's a former car park. In West London. In Vienna, we are in a former travel agency or like a train station office. In Seoul, we are in a luxury fashion store. We have our own floor and a rooftop sculpture garden. In Monaco, we are in a more like a private designed house. And then we have a gallery space in Decentraland as well on the Ethereum blockchain. And we provide these spaces to artists so they can produce work to show it there. And then even take this idea of providing space further. Space is also a magazine, a podcast, an Instagram feed. But it's all a stage we invite artists to present their work at.
So you mentioned earlier Conrad Fischer, being a show, right? You're an impresario, and you're as much a producer, collaborating with the artist. And I assume also that means you have an economic relationship that allows you to either plan on a show-by-show basis or on some longer-term basis how you are both going to pay back the cost of putting on the show, but also benefit from the success of it.
Yes, I mean, it also sort of changed. We do represent artists, and I have a very really manage their careers, help them develop it in a very narrow way, an old school way, where other galleries pay us commissions, and we are functioning a bit like a financier also for production. But more and more, we also started to do Kunsthalle-like exhibitions, sometimes with a more and sometimes lesser financial incentive or interest. So we collaborated with, we did an solo exhibition with Isa Gensken. We did a big curated show of digital painting and sculpture, or painting and sculpture in the digital era, which was a museum-like exhibition in the metaverse, and in reality, actually 1 year ago already. So we, it's also maybe because the exhibition space appears more like a museum. So also 95% of the visitors who come in always think that it costs entrance because of its recognition.
That's interesting. I mean, I was going to ask, when you were saying earlier about, sort of basically hosting spaces and all, when you do a lot of the work that you do, there's no direct compensation for it. And it almost, we are moving towards, there are more of these sort of experience events around art. There was, before the pandemic, and one presumes it will happen again, more of these art as experience, shows that in many cases are ticketed, and you pay a fee to go in and see the Rain Room. Or you were just saying this as it's sort of a shame they think that they have to pay to get in, or is that an opportunity?
I think that we need to be open-minded. And I think that's a problem I have with the art market or art world in general. I think it's super progressive from its content, because the artists are open-minded and open thinkers. But I think that the industry structures are extremely conservative and very narrow-minded, which I really find a problem. But I hope it will get better by force automatically, by the evolution of the outside industries disrupting the art world. So I think it's important to remain open to it. For me, it's very important at the time being we had a big exhibition, for example, now with Refik Anadol, where we had 4 hours waiting lines outside. And of course, this would have been a huge ticketed success. But we worked so hard in the past years to make people aware of the fact that there are free exhibitions to attend, and
you don't want to go backwards.
Exactly, take away the anxiety and it's even for insiders. Imagine the cold atmosphere of a huge Chelsea gallery. It's like you need it takes courage to step over this doorstep, and we really worked hard on using different strategies with musicians to bring people into the art, and to then leverage this to make tickets. As long as we can avoid to, we don't want to.
And you have a show on right now at the old Tempelhof airport, right? There, and the hangars are now being converted into exhibition spaces. You have a Bernard Venet show taking place out there. Is that part of the same sort of broader looking for different sorts of spaces and being able to, bring people to a place that they feel there's less resistance to crossing that threshold?
Oh, that's not our exhibition. we gave some loans and provided some support, but it's the exhibition of a foundation which is doing big exhibitions. They did a big exhibition called Diversity United, which is traveling the world. And this is the airport is a big city political issue, because originally they wanted to create, we have a huge housing problem in Berlin, and which is also interesting, talking about like the old times.
Yes,
exactly, like in the early 2000s, Berlin was like the El Dorado, because there was so much space. Everybody had giant apartments, and we had this lucky moment where we were able to acquire this building here in Kreuzberg, the former church complex. And we have this, the Berghain is a reused building. Our building is reused. Then there is a Boros collection in a former World War II bunker. So Berlin has a lot of these cultural, actually private cultural places, And now the former airport, I think it has 12 hangars or something like this, and 2 of them are used now for 2 years for exhibitions. And we just happen to be the representing gallery of Bernard Venet.
I bring it up just because, ever since the Bilbao Museum's success, there has been a long-running trend towards using culture as an economic driver for various cities around the world. Berlin has traditionally been one of the art centers of Europe. The growth of your gallery there, I mean, is there another gallery from Berlin that has sort of opened international outposts? I mean...
Oh, yeah, I mean, of course, Sprüt Magas, they have galleries in London and LA, I think. Buchholz has one in New York. Yeah, probably you're right. I mean, what's interesting, what you say is that tried multiple times back then when we started Gallery Weekend to have the city supported in any way, but it never really worked out. We wish we would have more support there. Actually, I think that Germany is in Europe the most terrible place to be an art dealer in entire Europe, because I mean, the greatest and the worst at the same time, because the greatest artists have a lot of support here. Also in Berlin, in the Corona times, each artist had a immediate financial support of 5,000 euro, which of course is great for the whole. I mean, there's no art market without artists. So, yeah. And then there is a social security for artists, which is very high in Germany. But the problem with the social security, for example, is whatever turnover I make with a Chinese artist, with an American artist, we always have to pay 5% on the turnover we are making, we are sending to the artist, even if they're outside Germany, because the legislation says, or the jurisdiction says, so not to compete, to keep it fair for German artists. Otherwise, they wouldn't trade German artists anymore. So it's a very old-fashioned model, but that really limits growth of the art market. Yeah, if you look at the art market report, you see that Germany is a huge de-accession field. Polke, Richter, Kippenberger, and so on. It's there's a lot of coming from German collections, but not so much
not being bought into. Yes, and that's a European-wide and also now a U.S. problem in some ways. Not as much in the U.S. And maybe we should talk about Asia and how you have an outpost in Seoul. I assume you have, either through fairs or coming to your exhibitions, some substantial Asian clientele, because they are a significant portion of the art market these days.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's interesting that we really run a global business. And maybe also that's important to talk about. The role today of a gallery is very much how to place works where, and to really make sure somehow how to plan a certain market career also as far as you can really control that. That's very more and more difficult. But that's pretty much also a new challenge, which always has been there, but now even more than ever. We spend as much work on placing the work as we used to spend on selling it.
Yes, I think I asked you about Huang Yuxing, whose market seemed to take a very big step up in the last year or so, with some very strong sales and then a sort of monster sale in Hong Kong. But that also was about the same period that you began to represent him and others in Europe began to represent him in Europe. So I don't know, going back to your earlier point, are there European collectors buying significant Asian artists or discovering, Asian artists through dealers like you and your peers?
Yeah, I think that it's really more of even the market is so global. I think it still has a very local connection, and that sometimes you notice you have, for example, an extreme high in demand artist on a fair, and you hold it back, and you say, okay, let's see what great candidate, public museum, whoever comes by. And then you notice that it doesn't really work like this anymore, that there's no discovery on that level, but a million of people who have buying lists coming into the booth and specifically asking for this. Sometimes we have high in demand artists we really try to sell to our legacy collections here in Germany because we want to build cultural longevity. And they don't understand why really there's this fuss about it, So it's interesting how these different words are coming together.
And it's not necessarily clear that demand persists, right? There will be moments when lots of people want a specific artist, but then that may fade as they become, focused on other artists or other things, and you're still either trying to support that artist or support the collectors who are trying to gain access there.
I'm not so sure if that really is still applicable, because when you think of the pure number population in China, and if there's a strong trend and there's a strong interest, it's really a question of numbers. The few works available, even if an artist is prolific, it's so little. The population is so large. I think it's a different momentum than in this period time of crabstraction, which is a sort of a mean term, but this process-driven abstraction. I think that you can't really compare or also now with the African American. It's also different because it has a different political legitimation. And it's finally a big problem which has been overcome. But I think looking at strong demand from Asia, I don't think that the trends will fade as fast as they used to fade it in the past.
In other words, they'll persist, these trends, longer?
Yes, because in the pure mass of number size of active participants in the market.
So if you have to wait for that work, there are enough people. No matter how long the wait, there's a large enough waiting list to sort of keep at it for a while.
I mean, waiting lists don't necessarily are ever able to be fulfilled. I just think that this is driving prices extremely high.
And do you feel like there is? You mentioned earlier this sort of sense of trying to convince local institutions that this isn't something you can necessarily take your time to decide on. Here's your opportunity. If you don't, there's lots of people ready to take this. Is that sort of part of that same equation? It's just,
Yeah, we take the time to the unpopular vote of many clients. It's a bit different strategy than many galleries, but we have no problem with having a show come to an end and we haven't decided who to place the work with. I mean, often the prices of primary works are so relatively low, so it's fine to wait until we really have the perfect fit for it. But what we do, for example, I think, unlike many others, at least we try to be super transparent about it. We have a solo booth now with Ayako Rukaku in Freeze, LA, who also has a 30x multiple on the secondary market. And then we just try to communicate as clear as possible why we are not just able to sell it. And I think that's also important to do, to take also new possible customers or clients, collectors, to share with them the mechanics of the art world and how they function. Because often we had a lot of younger beginning collectors, and they were so turned off by never been able to buy anything and they just couldn't. And they had this even with like a board member from Deutsche Bank. Their daughter had an internship at the gallery. They were not art collectors. They started to say, okay, maybe we should buy some art. No, you can't buy this. No, you can't buy that. No, you can't buy this as well. No, this one also is not available. And then they're like, what's going on here? And I think that's part of our role as well to explain.
I guess what you were saying earlier about not wanting to be a gatekeeper, you need to educate people on what the representation involves. It's not your choices necessarily. It's trying to help the artist achieve the artist's goals, and that may create frustration for many of the potential clients because they view it as a luxury good. I should be able to walk in the store and say, I like that, sell it to me.
Exactly. Yeah, and that we are fulfilling our responsibility in providing guidance and managing certain careers.
You've opened galleries in all of these locations, including the metaverse. You are in Seoul. What's next? More moving towards the digital side of things? Are you looking for another space in another city, or is it, what opportunity arises?
So we are really heavily investing and building out our online activities with looking into very much the educational part and how to use podcasts, interviews, sort of content marketing, you would call it, studio visits, really much about explaining art and also explaining the business, but also experimenting with conversational commerce, that you have like a live chat function. And I really do think that we as gallerists and dealers, we don't have the scarcity effect auction houses have. So we have to see, that's like pure competition on
deadline.
On deadline, and also can be quite brutal, because the lower you start, the more scarcity you create. Eventually, the price goes up, but it also might not be. On also looking into the NFT space, not so much for content, but more for utility, learning utility logics. You have to have this to get this. You have to have this to even get into the room. Things like this, and that's something I think very interesting, and also I think it will fundamentally change the art market.
The idea of NFTs as a membership, the Bored Apes that gives you access to the Discord server, the being able to use the NFT as a way to create a kind of mezzanine level of participation in an artist's work or career seems one of the great opportunities. I mean, how to actually build that out, I think, is also a very complex, difficult thing to do. But, there are plenty of people, we were just talking about waiting lists, you sort of want to be able to give people on the waiting list something, even if you haven't been able to give them a work of art yet. And it almost feels like things like NFTs, which would be tradable and all, might be that kind of mezzanine level of participation.
Now, what I find interesting is we get a lot of emails, applications of people saying why they are the good fit to buy something. And then there's all this list of what they have in their collection. And it's often a very repetitive list, George Condo, and then so on. And first of all, I don't find that so inspiring. I mean, what people try to say with this is that they say, I bought this and I haven't part from it, even though it's a big gain opportunity, but it doesn't say anything of the. First of all, you can't really check, and that was what's possible with public wallets. You just see if it's real or not, and I think a lot of people haven't really understood. They see NFTs or hear about it, and they think of the images they know from people or they have seen in the media, but don't understand that it's actually only technology, which is providing a lot of answers to these questions we're constantly busy with in the art world. Who to trust? Lately, we could hear a lot about breach of contract, non-resale agreements.
Yep.
All this you can, the problem, what we often forget being in the art world. And that's also why, for example, not because of my narcissistic disorder, were okay to become such of a more public figure, is because I did not want to leave the media opinion, at least in Germany, on art to Beltracchi, who's this forger, or to Helga Achenbach, who had jail time for screwing clients and telling, this overcharging them. And fractional ownership, or shared investments like Inigo Philbrick did. All these things also were actually, the biggest victim was a German, Berlin.
Yes. Yep.
So and all these question of trust, they are solved to a wide extent on the blockchain, and I think that we need to build more trust. Because the public opinion about art, has some issues to it.
No, I think that is one of the most important things. You put your finger on it. The popular perception of the art world is all the negative. In fact, there's a romanticizing of one, it's an elite thing, therefore it's morally bankrupt. The money overtakes any sense of the art. The thing about NFTs that makes them exciting is their ability to create community around them, and that's always been one of the central goals for artists and in the art world is creating community around either the art or individual artists. So it certainly seems like there are lots of opportunities there, but we're still very much early days. It's almost like we were talking about with the cities and all. I mean, a lot of this just happens. No one necessarily controls it, and a lot of experimentation yields more of the results than anything else.
No, and I think that transparency is a very important factor. And of course, there's also manipulation. Where isn't? And there's not enough regulation at this point, probably. I mean, in Germany, there's too much regulation. For us, it's really been challenging.
Well, and regulation isn't necessarily the solution to these kinds of problems. Transparency is. I mean, I think the art world needs to build a level of trust, not have it imposed imperfectly from the outside when no one has a good answer of what that regulation would look like. If you had a good answer, that'd be one thing. But so far, it's just regulation in the abstract form.
Absolutely. But for example, I think we are the only gallery on Art Basel publicly showing the prices we are asking. And it took us quite some time to really take this path. But I really do think that it's because there's no reason to be ashamed of asking a lot of money for these artworks, or not, depending on the perspective. And I got that feedback from many clients that they don't dare to ask too often on too many items and all artworks, and that still there's this myth. They think that everybody gets a different quote, and I think that we can only meet these cliches and by being very transparent about what we do.
That's great. This has been fantastic, Johann. I appreciate you taking the time. I don't want to take too much from the rest of your day.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much. I love your podcast. I'm happy that it's picked up now. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for joining us at the Artelligence Podcast, edited by Colin Ketchen, who also composed the original music. For more episodes, listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to download the LiveArt app or visit us at liveart.io. Please join us for the next episode of the Artelligence Podcast. We're looking forward to it.